everyone. This is another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. Used to be called Conversations with Rob. And thanks everyone for listening to our YouTube podcast. We're also featured on some radio stations around the country. So if you hear us on there, thanks so much for listening. Greatly appreciate that. I am interviewing someone that, as a person that's a millennial and very fond of unions. We saw in Orlando in general, the Fight for 15 with Disney workers winning that with the help of the organization of the unions in Disney, and also Bernie Sanders helping Disneyland and Disney World workers. We're seeing this in the fight, and we need to get organized as young people in general all across the country to try to make sure that people get fair wages and get treated correctly in the workplace. And with this is where this interview is going to start. Cristobal Reyes, he is Orlando Sentinel writer and a Sentinel guide rep. Now, some people that are not in the Orlando area might not know what we're talking about right now. The Orlando Sentinel is the big paper in Central Florida, and they are trying to form a union. And if they do form this union, the group will be part of the news guide, CWA, which is the nation's largest union for journalists and news industry employees. So, Cristobal, thanks so much for coming on the program. We greatly appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
So with everything going on, I want to definitely focus on the union aspect, but with the coronavirus, I do want to throw one question in about that. But first, can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
So what do you want to know? So I am a crime writer. I cover crime and breaking news in Osceola County, which covers like Kissimmee. It's pretty close to the parks. There are a couple of things that I've been working on in terms of like high profile murder cases and so forth. So it's not just like me covering things like in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, I'm one of several people who work on the justice and safety team at the Orlando Sentinel.
All right. So with knowing that, and obviously we just know, and everybody knows about the coronavirus is going on. And I am worried because in Central Florida, not just because Central Florida is a big population area where we have a lot of tourists, and which stuff could get contaminated very quickly with people catching this virus. Not only that, but also Florida in general. We just saw on March 17th, the Democratic primary happened. The Governor DeSantis let it go on, and we talk about, in previous podcasts we just talked about, I believe that was a bad issue by Governor DeSantis to let that go on for people that, you know, a lot of people my age, your age, we might not be symptomatic, but we have parents, grandparents that we could easily give this coronavirus to. Just with that going on, what is your take on that in general? And also, how has the coronavirus hit the Orlando Sentinel and you in person with the reporting aspect, going out, talking with people, covering crime? Is it tougher to get people to talk to you because they're scared about the symptomatic stuff? And basically getting work done in general? How has that affected you?
Well, I guess I'll answer that in reverse. So at the Sentinel right now, what we've been doing is working from home. You have some of us who have taken our monitors home so that we can have the double screen, just kind of making sure that we have everything that we need to do our work safely. But in terms of getting stuff done, at least a lot of the agencies here are still responding to emails. People are still answering their phones. Yeah, there are some people, I imagine, who have issues of getting in touch with other people because of concerns about the coronavirus, or rather COVID-19. But we still are able to put out content day in and day out. We're still able to do our job. And I think we're still doing this. There is now a penny a day subscription for people who want to have access to the full scope of the website, and also the paywall is down for any coverage related to the coronavirus. So, you know, we're trying to get our information as possible within the limitations of what we have. We do have some people who have compromised immune systems who can't do their job as effectively as they otherwise would. But we're still trying to find our ways around it. Now we're in our second week working from home, and from what we understand, this might just be the case for the foreseeable future. As for the election, yeah, I think part of it does have to do with the state government not deciding to postpone it. It also has to do a little bit with the DNC not calling for that. So it's an amalgamation of a bunch of things, but I think overall people are still trying to figure out how do we deal with this crisis? How do we deal with this pandemic? Obviously, elections are a big thing, and I think I'm pretty sure several other states have postponed their primaries in response to it. It's a shame that it didn't happen here, but the show has to go on, I guess.
It's Florida. I'm not
Yeah.
surprised. Anyway, we'll move forward and talk about what we really want to talk about and what this interview is about is unions. A lot of people in this country, and I've worked at quite a few different places. I'm a teacher, but I've also worked in restaurants. I've worked in fast food and, growing up. And they really talk about how bad unions are. They hurt people, they hurt wages, all this stuff. And we hear all this bad stuff on TV, mostly, not to get into politics, but mostly by the right side of the aisle, saying that how much they hate unions. As a person that's going through that right now and trying to form a union, and your election is March 25th in 2 days, can you firstly describe the process of how you went about forming a union?
Well, it was a process that went on for a little more than a year. I think might have even been 2 years, where you have different people organizing, trying to get people to come on board, trying to gauge support. This was before I even got there. I've only been at the Sentinel for, I think, about 8 months now. So this all came before I even showed up. I think within 2 weeks of me getting there, they asked me if I wanted to be on board with the union. I didn't even let them answer. I didn't even let them finish the question. I just said, yeah, you just tell me what to do and I'll do it. The biggest challenge was trying to get some of the veteran reporters on board. They've been in the game, many of them as long as like 20, 30, I think one of them was even 40 years at the paper. And, they've been talking about unions for a very long time with different editors, different publishers, some with more support than others. And so a lot of people were just very skeptical about what sort of benefits that they would get. Obviously, we're in a right to work state, so it makes things a little more complicated. But once we were able to receive about 80% of newsroom support, we went public. We tried to seek voluntary recognition. We didn't get voluntary recognition, so now we have to go to an election which has been postponed indefinitely because of COVID-19. We're trying to see what other ways we can get around that. We're pushing again for voluntary recognition. We haven't received a response back, naturally. So right now things have been on pause. We're still trying to put out our message and trying to make sure that everybody who is in support of the union stays within that camp, and just kind of make sure that nobody who is on our side panics as a result of the pandemic.
Right, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation about unions going on in this country, especially in the tourism industry. We see that, Orlando area is basically made up of, probably about 80 to 90% of tourism jobs in general. So can you talk about also what do unions do to help workers?
Well, one thing that you mentioned that I thought was interesting when you brought up the Disney workers.
Right.
They have done an incredible job in terms of upping people's wages, providing better protections, negotiating with employers ahead of the pandemic. And I imagine, as you know, that union workers typically have better salaries than non-union workers, typically have better health benefits than non-union workers. Obviously, it's not a perfect process, and obviously a lot of it is mired by politics and stereotypes. When people think of unions, often they think about like the Teamsters and Jimmy Hoffa and the Mafia and all these other cats. So, it all comes down to that sort of thing, but, it's obviously not all of it is true. The politics of unions are very complicated, and it depends guild by guild. But we're not particularly political. We're actually not political at all. We're just trying to make sure that that we get what we think we deserve as journalists, people who provide a public service to the community.
Right, I agree. And most unions, majority, are fighting for better wages, better health care, better benefits, as you guys are in the journalism industry. So 100% agree with you.
And
Why do you,
like,
go
and
ahead, I'm
also
sorry.
the personal politics of everybody there. Like, we have liberals, we have conservatives, we have people who are right in the middle, we have people who are even apolitical who are in this. So it's not like it's not a leftist movement, it's not a liberal movement, it's not a conservative movement, it's a solidarity movement that we're really pushing forward with. And I think a lot of the people who are part of it, who have signed on to it, we're not thinking about the politics of it, at least not from a left to right perspective. We're just trying to make sure that we get what we think should be coming to us.
Right, I agree 100%. And that's how all the workers should be paid fair wages. That's just what's right in America and in all over the world in general. Why do you believe unions are so hated in this country?
Like I said, a lot of it has to do with politics. A lot of it has to do with stereotypes. Like,
Propaganda?
yeah, propaganda, absolutely. Like, when people think unions, they think, the Irishman. They think Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters, and that, and it's, unfortunately, it's effective messaging. Like, you have people who believe this sort of thing, and as a result, union membership has dropped significantly since, what was it, like the 60s or the 70s. So and also with right to work laws going on around the country, people have been successfully moving with the talking point that, if you want union benefits, you shouldn't have to pay dues, or you shouldn't have to participate if you don't want to. You should still be able to participate and reap the benefits, which on some level has its own internal logic, but I'm not well versed enough to really dig into that.
That's
but
fair.
It's one of those things where it's damn it, I just blanked.
That's all right. No, I get what you're saying. With Disney, I know that, and with any job, we're paying these people to fight for us, apparently, not paying anything is not working, because a lot of these jobs that I've been in that, they don't have unions, they're right to work jobs. Even the state is a right to work state, as you said. These big corporations, they don't give a damn about workers. They're not going to pay them a fair wage. So we're paying these people. Yeah, maybe we should have that in general, people just fighting for each other. But we're paying these people to fight and negotiate health care and stuff. And hopefully there are politicians running, not to get into politics, that do want, free health care in this country like we do in every other country in the civilized world. And hopefully that happens.
Right.
So, we can fight for, some unions, they'll get a better wage for the person, but then the corporation takes away, or makes them pay more for healthcare. So it's a give and take, and that's not how America or any country should be, or any corporation should treat their workers. But I want to get on to this. What did you said the Orlando Sentinel has been fighting for quite a long time for this union movement and trying to get the Sentinel organized and in the union. What was the tipping point? I know you only been there for 8 months, but what was the tipping point where you said and felt maybe journalists stand up and said, hey, we're finally going to get this done, we're going to do this?
Well, the tipping point actually came after I showed up. I'm pretty sure you're aware of Alden Capital. They're considered to be like, and this is something that our editor-in-chief referred to them as the Darth Vader of the newspaper industry.
Right.
They're out here taking over papers, gutting them, and then selling them off for a profit. Like this is the epitome of a vulture capitalist hedge fund group. So once they announced that they were going to take a third share of Tribune Publishing, which owns the Orlando Sentinel, we figured, well, looks like we're next, because it looked like we were seeing the same thing happening with Gatehouse and Gannett with the merger. We were seeing what Alden was doing at newspapers across the country, and the idea or the thought of us being next on that chopping block, it really got a lot of people who were initially skeptical to rally around the idea of the union. So, that was really, I think, the tipping point. The other thing also was when people started to understand that, you know, a lot of us at the Sentinel haven't gotten raises in about 10 years, I mean, sometimes even more than that. And we're talking about people who have been there for a very, very long time. And when you have on top of that, that the newsroom is not very diverse. We just lost our last Black staff writer to a buyout. You know, once we saw all of that, we figured, you know what, we really need to start pushing a lot more seriously, especially with Alden coming in and looking to shake things up. We figured, you know, now's the time, and I think a lot of people agreed with that.
Cristobal Reyes here on Fire Breathing Rob. Please subscribe and share this video. I want to talk about this. What have been the struggles you feel? I mean, obviously, I feel like the coronavirus is a struggle now, where the election was in 2 days. Now you got to postpone it. So all that hard work, you got to obviously keep it up. But, you know, it's going to be a tough time. We don't know what's going to happen with this virus. But besides the virus, what other struggles have you faced in forming the union?
For the most part, it's been management trying to push back. They haven't pushed back as aggressively as you would have seen at the Arizona Republic or at the Miami Herald, for example. Have been trying to push a bit of an anti-union campaign. They had to sit down at a mandatory meeting where they kind of gave their side of things, their side of the story, so to speak. They have put up signs around the office, very vague ones that say "Know the facts." They recently sent out a mass company email with a list of benefits that they said that weren't achieved because of the union, one of which, hilariously enough, was free parking, which, I mean, I'm sold right there, I guess. Free parking, no sick leave. I mean, it's fantastic what we have at the Sentinel without a union. Anyway, so you have stuff like that, but it hasn't been like a very forceful pushback. And you know, especially with the pandemic going on, obviously their mind is not on the anti-union push. We're still obviously trying to push back and trying to get them voluntarily recognized as a result of the postponement of the election. But you know, like the virus moved so quickly that any sort of pushback that we could have gotten just kind of got pushed to the back burner.
So what's going to happen with the election? Obviously, it's postponed indefinitely because of the virus, Cristobal. But what would be the talk? Couldn't they do the election through email or some sort of internet type of way, just to kind of go ahead?
We tried to we try to anticipate us having to go home by having the NLRB change the election to all mail ballots. Tribune Publishing was okay with it. We were okay with it. The Labor Board was okay with it. But then once we were all told to stay home, they just decided, you know what, we're going to postpone all elections until further notice. I mean, we probably already got the mail ballot. They were supposed to be getting here by, I think, today or even later this week. So everything was kind of already in motion, but the Labor Board decided to say, no, we're going to move ahead with the postponement and just kind of we'll see what comes from there. So
they're just kicking the can down the road, to be honest.
Right.
Like you said.
What we said before, and we've done this on Twitter also, calling out Tribune Publishing, is that what they're doing is postponing the inevitable. We are going to win this election. We have an 80% base of support. That doesn't look like it's going to be changing. If anything, we might even have some people flipping on our side. So, you know, there's no point in delaying this any longer, but such is life.
3 more questions on this topic, then I wanted to hit one other topic besides that. And thanks so much for your time, Cristobal Reyes, here on Fire Breathing Rob. What are the wages, benefits, and working conditions that you were looking to negotiate, you know, with the Tribune Publishing? Any ideas about that yet? Have you guys discussed that yet? I know it's postponed, but in general?
So we have not decided exactly what the priorities are. We know what we want to focus on, but nothing has been put on paper just yet. Right now, what we're looking at is improving wages, possibly tying that to rising housing costs, merit pay, performance pay, seniority pay, having a seat at the negotiating table when they decide to do buyouts. One of the things we also talked about was whenever there's a layoff, whenever like after a layoff period, if there is a job that opens up, if someone fits the description among the people who were laid off, they get first option. One of the other things also was an emphasis on diversity. But one of the things now that we've been starting to talk about, even though we're not sure what it would look like just yet, but we do want to see what we can get in terms of protections in the event of a pandemic. I don't know if you're paying attention to the layoffs across industries, including ours. Right. The Tampa Bay Times recently laid off several of their staff workers, including Craig Pittman, who is a legend around these. He's been at that paper for the better part of 20 years. But because of because of COVID-19 and because of already existing financial pressures, many people had to be laid off. They took a 10% pay cut. We saw the same thing with the Orlando Weekly, which is a culture magazine in the city, which laid off just about all of its workers in response to the pandemic. So that's another thing that we're worried about. We don't want to be next, and if for whatever reason we have to be, we hope to in the future be. We hope to be able to negotiate language that gives us some form of protection.
And I didn't know that all those papers were really laid off. I know a lot of the industries, and we've talked about this in Central Florida. I know a second job I have, they put me on furlough, which is a nice term for saying you're out of work for a while. But that's par for the course right now with this pandemic. You talked a little bit about this in the interview with the long tenured writers, and the reporters taking buyouts. Do you feel like if there was a union in place already that those writers would stick around for a while? And how do you, if you guys do get that union going, when you do get it, I should say, like you said, you have 80% of the people already want that union. Do you believe that practice will stop of writers being bought out and taking those buyouts rather?
So when you have a union, obviously you can't guarantee that no one's ever going to be laid off. Unfortunately, even though we can try to slow down the process, we still are inevitably going to be at the mercy of whatever market pressures or whatever financial pressures they might have. What we're asking for specifically is not that we don't get buyouts or not that we don't get layoffs, but that we have a better negotiating position to help dictate the terms of what the buyouts look like. Because so far what we've had right now is they kind of slip you a number and say take it or leave it, and if you leave it, you're at risk of being laid off somewhere further down the line. What we're trying to do is have a greater anticipation of when these layoffs are going to happen, when these buyouts are going to happen, and obviously some wiggle room in terms of trying to negotiate that. So no, it's not perfect, and it's not something everybody wants to hear when it comes to that sort of thing. But I think we'd be much better off if we had some form of leverage. Like one of the things that our editors said in that mandatory meeting was they were against a union because it would make them less, this is their words, less nimble to make decisions, less flexible to make decisions, which, well, is kind of the point if you think about it. Right. We're not trying to just get laid off without a second thought. We want to be able to say, hey, you still have to go through us. You still have to talk to us, something like that. Again, so we can't guarantee that there aren't ever going to be layoffs, but if we can at least have a seat at the table when something like that is coming down the pike, then I think it's at least a start.
Get to newspapers dying? Is it because of online, just social media? People have so many news sources, television too.
So interesting that you mentioned that the Sentinel has cut back. We actually have a reporter there who keeps track of this sort of thing. Like since he's been there for a very long time. He's kept track of everybody who was left and the reasons why. About 10 years ago, we had more than 300 people working at the Sentinel. Currently, we're at about a third of that, less than a third of that. So yeah, I mean, and this is something that, as you said, like this is happening all over the country. Part of it does have to do with people switching to online. We're still, like, the industry still hasn't been able to adequately catch up to that. And also with the amount of news sources you have now, credible or not, broadcasts, international papers, online blogs. Unfortunately, again, whether or not they're credible is a separate question. People have all kinds of access to whatever information that they want to find, whatever flavor, whatever policy position, you know. But the thing also that we've noticed is that, at least in the Sentinel, digital subscriptions are up. People are switching over to digital, obviously at the expense of the paper copy, but that's just the trend of the age, I think. But also a big problem is that somewhere along the way, we have treated news and media less as a public service and more as a commodity to make a profit on. And I think it's pretty obscene when Tribune Publishing or people who stakeholders at Tribune Publishing get multi-million-dollar dividends, and people and the people up top are getting multi-million-dollar bonuses while still claiming that there's no money to invest in us. We're constantly being told that the industry is changing and that everything is not as profitable as it used to be, but it's okay because we are still profitable. It's like, okay, if we're still profitable, you know, throw some of that our way. But, you know, just going back to the state of newspapers, it has to do with a lot of things. It's not just one thing. And part of it also has to do with the way social media has their metrics set up. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that Facebook has been caught over inflating its metrics numbers at the expense of people who have done the pivot to video, the pivot to online. So there's more at play than just what the consumer wants. It also has to do with fraudulent behavior by people or by platforms that have marketed themselves as being like the end all be all of the digital age. So the answer is pretty cliche, but cliches exist for a reason. The best way is to subscribe. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, because we get paid off of this sort of thing. This is how we make our money, is by people subscribing and people paying for the work, for the information that they want to know. You know, that's just the nature of the game. You have to pay for the information. And this is not just, you know, information you can get anywhere else. This is like an in-depth look at what's going on. For example, I'm sure you're aware of Laborland, the series of stories that we had, or that
great, yeah.
About the working conditions of people who work in the parks. And we also had a major investigation about corporate loopholes and the companies that take advantage of them at the expense of state revenues and at the expense of people in general. This is information that you're not going to get most anywhere else. The broadcast news, as well as they do their job, they're not focused on that sort of thing. Local news affiliates can only do so much in terms of that. They have resources as limited as ours, and also, you know, they have to package things a little differently, and, you know, they do fantastic work on their own. But the stuff that we've been putting out lately has been stuff that you're not going to find much anywhere else. And also the problem is not just in metropolitan areas, but you also have very small towns who are seeing this, who are seeing their newspapers being gutted or just removed altogether. And like you said, like, people want to read about what's going on in their communities. They want to read about whether or not their mayor is corrupt, or whether or not their tax dollars are going somewhere, that it probably shouldn't be. In my case, people want to know about police brutality. They want to know the latest updates on a high-profile case. They want to know, most recently, we found out that a prosecutor had been a domestic violence victim, and he was caught on voice recording admitting to that. and so these are things that people need to know. These are things that people want to know, and it's information that we're trying to provide to them. And it's hard to do that when people don't want to subscribe, and it's not like it costs much, especially now with COVID-19. I mean, we're subscriptions are a penny a day, 30 days out of the month, 30 cents. That's less than a bag of chips.
Yeah.
And in many cases, like, I mean, what actually are you paying for a subscription? $7, $10, $12 a month? That's nothing. That's a drop in the bucket for many people. Or you can buy individual copies of the newspaper. There are many ways that you can support us, but the main way to do that is to subscribe.
I know a lot of people get that Sunday paper because they want those coupons.
Yeah. Well, if you do it for the coupons, it's still helpful.
Yeah. No.
But
Anyways,
I get why some people don't want to pay for that sort of thing, because information now, by and large, is free. Like, why would you want to pay a subscription when you can get when theoretically you can get the information somewhere else? Unfortunately, what people don't realize is that that's not actually the case. There are bits of there are stories that come out that you're never going to know about unless you pay the subscription, and it's stuff that is very, very important. I mean, Laborland is one of those examples, and as well as the project on corporate loopholes. You're not going to find that in any of the local TV stations. You're not going to find that, at least not like if we're talking Orlando specifically. You're not going to find that in the New York Times. You're not going to find that in NBC News. You're not going to find that on CNN. You're going to find that at the Orlando Sentinel. And if it does show up on the broadcast stations, it's going to be because, they have invited one of our reporters to talk about it. So, that's just really the nature of the game. If people really want to have this information and really want these publications like ours to survive, they're going to have to subscribe. They're going to have to support us with their dollars and not just with their eyeballs.
No, I agree with you 100%. My last question is, we've heard throughout 2015 and 2016 rather about fake news. Everything now is fake news. If you don't like something, if I think the Orlando Sentinel is liberal or conservative, I'm going to say it's fake news. I have a neighbor over here that calls it the Orlando Slantinel.
Yep, that's the one we always hear.
but in general, I think the reporting is very fierce. And, I know we brought up quite a few times in the Laborland articles, and those were not slanted towards unions. Those were not slanted to a corporation. Those were just right down the middle. And most, I feel like the reporting at the Sentinel is right down the middle. But
Well, the interesting thing about the whole fake news argument and people calling us the Slantinel, a lot of the time what we've noticed is that this is when they refer to us as that, or they say that we're a liberal rag or whatever, more often than not, these aren't people who subscribe to us. And more often than not, they're referring to stories that aren't even written by us. This is stuff that's coming from the Associated Press. This is stuff that's coming from the New York Times or the Washington Post, and that we're just syndicating. This is not the work of the reporters at the Sentinel. We're not, the politics desk. I sit pretty close to them. They're not huddled in a corner wondering about how they're going to slander Donald Trump on a Tuesday. That's not what they do. And the stuff that we do put out, the original reporting that we do put out, obviously every now and again you'll have people, say that we're being biased or that we're liberal or this, that, or the other. But with stuff like Laborland and a lot of the other work that we've been doing, people have been responding pretty well, left, right, and center. And, like I said, digital subscriptions have been up from what we've been told. People are really responding to the work that we do. I mean, there are some people that you're never going to convert, like or not, right? Whoever. But there are people who are, you'll have people on the right who say that we're the Slantinel, this and the other. And maybe you'll have some on the left, someone out there who thinks that we're corporate media and we shouldn't be trusted. I guess they all have their internal logic. I mean, I'm not here to debate that.
No, I hear you.
But like I said,
go ahead. Sorry.
What we've been focusing on are the people who have been subscribing, who are paying attention, who understand the difference between opinion and news reporting, who understand the difference between syndicated stories and original reporting. And those are the people who have been loyal subscribers to us. And, the rest of them, I'm not going to say I don't care about their opinion. I most certainly do, because I do want the idealist in me does want a better informed democratic society. But like I said, there are just some people that can't be reached like that. And, we just have to combat claims of fake news with hard-hitting, truthful reporting. We've had the same issue happening with a story about public vouchers being used for private schools that discriminate against LGBTQ people. I have a bit of an activist background, and every single criticism of that, it follows three very basic things. It's a pivot, it's a move of the goalpost, and it's projection. Apparently we're the activists. Apparently, even though we have a database of more than 100 about more than 100 schools with different anti-LGBTQ policies, they're telling us, oh, you need to find one example of actual discrimination, even though they know for a fact that we can't get that because these are public school or private schools. So again, there's going to be propaganda. There's going to be pushback by people who either know what they're talking about and are openly concealing it, or people who have no idea what they're talking about and just seem to be okay with living with that. And, maybe we'll get some of them to come around, maybe not, but, that doesn't stop our mission, which is to put out hard-hitting reporting so that people in Central Florida and, anywhere else that wants to read us can be informed about what's going on here.
But I want to end this with this. Keep up the fight. And I hope you guys get that vote going soon, because we need more. We need you guys to get into a union, but we also need people all around the country to get more educated on unions and to get in unions in general. And I will end it with this, Cristobal. Can you tell people where they can find more from you and also more about the Sentinel Guide in general? And if they can help in any way, how could they help?
Well, the Sentinel News Guild, we're on all platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And again, subscribe to the Orlando Sentinel. That's really the best way that you can support us, support our work. Obviously, follow us on all social media so that you can get updated on what we're doing as a guild. But yeah, other than that.
All right. Cristobal Reyes, thanks so much for coming on the program. Fire Breathing Rob, please subscribe and share this video. As I said, we need to get more correct information about newspapers and also information on unions out there so people don't misrepresent newspapers or unions in general. So thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.